This is Leanne from Through the Archway. Today we're going to be dropping our second installment of the Overcome to Become series. We're featuring Akshay Nanavati. He's going to be going through and sharing with us his personal journey in the Marines and through addiction and recovery. We want to thank him so much for taking time to go through our questions and answer them. And we're going to let him take it away.
Hi, Leanne. This is Akshay. Thank you so much again for reaching out to me. I'm honored you are intrigued by my story when you saw that video interview. And thank you for your kind words as well and for the acknowledgement about my service. Semper Fi. I love that. I love when you said oorah. Always brings out the Marine and fires me up. You can see how much I love the Marines. I have an Iwo Jima flag right here. Anyway, thank you again for thinking of me, and I sincerely hope my story will be of value and help your audience. I know how hard it is to navigate the addiction battle, so I sincerely hope this will help. So, yeah, I will get right into answering your questions, and as I said, hope this will all be of value. So start with the questions. I read that you were in your teens when you were first exposed to drugs. Can you tell us more about that experience? Yes. So I had moved to Austin, Texas, around about 13 years old from India and Singapore. So by the time I moved to Austin, I had lived in four different cities: Bombay, Bangalore, Singapore, Austin. So as a result, I was very lost. I wasn't sure who I was, who I wanted to be. I didn't have a path. I wasn't one of those kids who, knew who I wanted to be at a very young age. And I was very adaptable. Adaptability to this day is one of my strengths, but like any strengths, your strengths can be also your shadows. So being someone who's adaptable, I got into a group of friends, and today I take responsibility for my actions and my behavior. But back then, as a young kid, you're very impressionable, and you get adapted into your environment. So I got into a group of friends, and we started going from alcohol to marijuana to much, much harder stuff. And I was always kind of this person who was pushing the line. So to this day, I'm still that same person. Now I just do it in positive ways. But I was always pushing the line to do things in a very extreme way. So even before I came to Austin, I remember in Singapore, I used to run barefoot on rocks to test myself. Or I remember when I was in India and a kid, I used to play rugby. Every time I got cut, I loved these cuts as a battle scar, So I was always the person pushing the line. So when we got into drugs, me and one other friend of mine, we were the first two to start going from alcohol and marijuana to harder drugs. And he's no longer alive today as a result of that. And I lost two friends to drug addiction. And I was headed down that path. I was in a very dark place. I used to cut myself. I still have the scars on my arm from cutting myself, burning myself. I have a scar right here from burning myself. Very self-destructive. Did a lot of self-destructive things that sometimes I can't believe I made it out alive. I mean, throwing knives up in the air, not in a professional way, trying to catch them. I mean, driving cars at 60 miles an hour down a steep hill in a residential neighborhood. Not only did I not kill myself, but thankfully, more importantly, I didn't hurt anybody else. So I was in a very, very, very dark way. I was at a point in my life that I would have done any drug that came my way. I was the one pushing the line, as I am today, but again, in healthier ways. But I wanted to explore the extremes in every single context. And so I was the one doing these intense, crazy things, And so that's what kind of drove me down into that dark path. And which leads me to the next question, the spark moment that drove my decision to join the Marines. It was watching the movie Black Hawk Down. And I still remember that evening. I mean, we were about to do another evening of getting drunk and doing drugs. And one friend wanted to go see the movie, but nobody else wanted to go. And I was like, all right, Luis, I'll go with you. And watching that movie, I don't know if you've seen the movie, but watching that movie planted the seed that changed my life. Watching these Medal of Honor recipients, Gary Gordon and Randy Sugar, who sacrificed their lives for Michael Durant, knowingly putting themselves in an incredibly hostile situation in front of two people, in front of 1,000 armed enemy personnel, knowingly doing that. It was awe-inspiring, the capacity for human courage, the limitlessness of the human spirit to transcend ourselves, but put our own lives on the line in service of something greater was profound. And so after watching the movie Black Hawk Down, I read the book Black Hawk Down right after. My friend who I went and saw the movie with, he had the book. He loaned me the book. I read Black Hawk Down and started reading book after book after book after book on military and life and combat. And pretty much overnight stopped doing drugs and decided to join the Marines. It took me about a year and a half to get in the Marines because I have a blood disorder that two doctors told me would kill me in Marine Corps boot camp. So I have a blood disorder, I have flat feet, I have scoliosis. So I had to get all these medical waivers to join. And that's why it took a little bit of time to finally to get into the Marines. But the Black Hawk Down was the spark, and then it just made me realize I was living a very selfish and meaningless existence, and I wanted to live in an institution where the good of the group mattered more than the individual, where you get to experience again. This was in a way just my own personality of exploring the edges, exploring the extremes, and now channel that into war, into going into the Marines, because I was an infantry Marine. So leading to your next question about my time in Iraq, I was an infantry Marine. So being infantry Marines on the front lines, we were in a place called Haditha. Had many different jobs out there and did a lot out there, but one of my jobs at one point when I was in Iraq was to walk in front of our vehicle convoys looking for IEDs, improvised explosive devices, bombs, looking for IEDs before they could be used to kill me and my fellow Marines. So pretty dangerous job, as you might imagine. But when I was there, it wasn't wild, wild west. There wasn't firefights happening regularly. We had rounds going off all the time around us. We had, rockets, IEDs. That was our big threat. The biggest threat was the IEDs. So, it was intense. It was war. So obviously experienced a lot of adversity. But I learned to find peace in the chaos of war. I learned that even when you can't control the world around you, because I was in war and I was a Marine. So if you're told to go do something, if you're told to go on a mission, it doesn't matter how tired you are. It doesn't matter how many days you've been on a mission without days off. It doesn't matter how you feel. You go do it. So I learned to find peace and to control my attitude when I could not control my actions, when I cannot choose my actions. And you can't choose your actions as a young non-commissioned officer in Iraq. So I learned to shape my attitude. Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, has had a tremendous impact in my life. He says, when you can't change your circumstance, we are challenged to change our own attitude. The last of human freedoms is to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances. And that's what I did. I ultimately changed my attitude and found me peace in the chaos of war. And I don't know if that was a spark moment that happened for Fearvana, because even before I went to Iraq and after joining the Marines and stopping drugs, I started finding other ways to test myself. And keep in mind, before I got into drugs, when I was a kid, I was terrified of everything. I was terrified of Ferris wheels, not even roller coasters, Ferris wheels, everything. So obviously I've taken a 180. So after joining the Marines, I started looking for other ways to test myself, to challenge myself. So I went mountain climbing, cave diving, skydiving, bungee jumping, scuba diving, rock climbing, ice climbing. I mean, you name it. Nature became my playground to push myself, to explore my fears, to engage fear. And it's not that I was fearless. I was scared of doing all of these things, of heights, of everything. But I did them to test myself, to push myself, to grow. So in a way, I was living this Fearvana lifestyle from all these dangerous sports. I was doing the outdoor sports, and I fractured 4 bones in 3 months from rock climbing and skydiving. So, I was doing some dangerous stuff. I've almost been killed multiple times, not just in war. But, and in fact, in war, I found out 10 years after the war that my vehicle drove over an active IED, but for some reason it didn't explode. Crazy to find that out. But anyway, so I had kind of got into it. So in the sense that, it wasn't necessary, but I wasn't necessarily doing this all consciously. It wasn't, I was living this life, but the Fearvana concept hadn't been fully crystallized yet. So after my time in the Marines, that I did experience addiction again. I completely stopped drugs after high school, but I was drinking. I was drinking a lot in college. After I came back from the Marines, I went to finish my undergrad, my senior year, and then I went to grad school. I was always a great student. I got a full scholarship in one of the best journalism schools in the country from grad school. Always a B to A minus student, B plus to A minus kind of student. Did enough to make sure I get good grades, and college student. So drinking during the weekends, partying hard, right? But so I never really saw it as a problem because I still trained, I still got everything done. But when I drank hard. I drank hard. It was not initially in college, it might have been just a Friday or maybe sometimes Friday and Saturday, but I drank hard. And then eventually, after coming out of grad school, I had a corporate job for a year and a half, hated the job. After the job, I spent 1 month dragging a 190-pound sled for 350 miles across the world's second largest ice cap in temperatures as low as minus 40 degrees. Amazing expedition, but the truth be told, looking back now, I realized that I was just doing everything I could to run away from myself, to run away from my demons, to run away from confronting my own darkness, my own survivor's guilt, my own feelings of inadequacy, that I haven't suffered enough in the war to earn my place on this planet. I haven't been shot. I didn't lose a limb. Who was I to have lived this life, to be alive? And so I was looking to keep going at the edges. Exploring Greenland was just one way of going into the edge, going in an extreme environment where you could die. And a British explorer died the following year of my crossing. So, it was an extreme environment. So I was just channeling that. So when I came back from Greenland, now with no job, no Marines, no expedition, because I didn't have much money to afford an expedition anymore, I I was building my business, and business was kind of going good. I've always been a very driven person. So but the drinking, without the external structure imposed upon me, the drinking started going from 1 day to 2 days to 3 days to 4 days. Eventually, I mean, I've been at a point, man, where I would drink like a full bottle of vodka a day and just drink till I pass out and wake up again and drink again until, this would go on for 5 to 7 days until, I mean, I've been at a point in my life that I was throwing up in the toilet, and I have flashes of memories of this. And right after I throw up, there's the bottle sitting on the shelf, and I would drink again. I mean, just a dark place. There's nothing pleasant about that drinking, obviously. So, I mean, those were some hard moments being in that low, going through the withdrawals. The withdrawals were brutal after some of these sessions. And the darkest moment when I was well, actually, I don't know if I've had some darker moments since, but I was at the verge of suicide. After one of these binge sessions, I woke up and was about to go to the kitchen and pick up a knife and slit my own wrists. So that was very, very, very dark. So that kind of answers that question about what was life turning into during this time of my life. What did it feel like when you were no longer the driver of your life? I mean, at first it wasn't, again, a big problem because business was growing and I was just drinking 1 day, 2 days. But it got to a point where it was getting really bad. And I would go through these binges and then I would be like, all right, you know what? You need to stop. Clearly something is wrong. But then a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever later, I would go right back into the binge. And my problem was because, again, I could never control it. I mean, if I drank hard. And then when you wake up the next day after a day of drinking, you don't want to awaken to that chaos of the mind, so you just start drinking again until finally you have to confront it, and then you go through those horrible, horrible withdrawals. And so, I mean, it was a really, it was a horrible time. I was married, but I was mostly hiding this, because when my wife was around, I would like. She knew I drank, but I'd maybe have a couple of beers in front of us. Right now, I'm no longer married, but I would maybe have a couple of beers in front of her. But I would then drink when I go to the bathroom. I would hide my vodka under the bathroom sink, and then when she'd go to bed, I'd be like, she always knew I've always been a night owl. I like to work at night, so she'd go to bed earlier, and I'd be like, oh, I'm just gonna hang out and stay up. So I managed to find ways to sneak around my drinking pretty well. I mean, we had a great marriage. I wasn't like obviously abusive or anything like that. None of that. We had a great marriage. She loved me. I loved her. Why it ended had nothing to do with my drinking. That's a whole different story I won't get into. But because at this point I had sobered up, and then it ended for a bunch of different reasons. But I was managing to sneak it. The binge drinking would happen when she was traveling. Maybe she was in India visiting a family, and that was my opportunity to go crazy. So it was dark. I mean, it felt horrible, and I just was running away from confronting myself. And what happened was, at this point, I had gone to the VA, the Veteran Affairs doctor, because to be very frank with you, my wife and I were struggling. I was struggling physically, sexually, and it wasn't a physical issue. It was nothing that. It was a psychological issue. So that was the point my wife finally said, "Look, let's go find out what's going on." So that was when I finally went to the VA. I can't remember what year this was. It's all a blur now. But I finally went to the VA, and that's when they diagnosed me with PTSD. And I was starting to see the therapist, but every time I would leave the VA, I would go straight to the liquor store, and I was in a dark place. I mean, everything felt awful. I hated it. Obviously, at this point, when the drinking started going up, obviously business was starting to slow down, as it happens, obviously, right? Business was getting worse and worse and worse. But until I hit that low moment when I was on the brink of suicide. That was the spark moment to change. So kind of leading to your next question, that was the spark moment when I hit the brink of suicide. And it wasn't a slow climb up. I mean, it wasn't a rapid. It wasn't like I hit that moment of being on the verge of suicide and suddenly everything changed. That wasn't it at all. I mean, it was a slow, dark climb out of that abyss, an arduous climb. I drank after that moment. It's not that that was the last time I ever drank. I fell back into the pit, but I was learning from every time. I was learning from every moment. I was learning from every fall. I was getting better, getting better, getting better, getting better. I started delving into research on neuroscience, on psychology and spirituality. My wife obviously helped. My family helped. I had great support. Jack Canfield, Chicken Soup for the Soul author, has been an incredible mentor of mine. He helped a great deal. His work helped me a great deal in sobering up and confronting my demons. But a lot of it also was just doing my own research and having to go. Here's the thing, like it is invaluable to have support, but you have to be willing to go there. This is a big thing I've seen with addicts that I've worked with and with other people, is that Yeah, obviously the support is good, but a lot of times, I mean, all the support in the world won't mean anything unless you go into those spaces that you're not willing to confront. And that's the thing. There's no easy path out. You have to go into the dark spaces. So I had to confront my survivor's guilt. I had to confront my feelings of inadequacy about not having suffered enough in the war. And I started to learn all kinds of stuff that led me to the to Fearvana. I can maybe get into that just looking at your questions. Specific memory that's particularly powerful that helped launch writing Fearvana. So, when I was doing all this work and finally I started getting better, and actually for a little while I was moderating alcohol. And I learned to moderate for a little bit, but the problem was little triggers would hit, and then eventually I would just go deep into the pit, like let's say watching a war movie or something. And so eventually I realized in history, everything about my life is pretty clear that I'm not very good at moderation. I mean, today I'm an ultra runner, right? So I don't do anything in moderation, which can be an asset. That's why I believe addicts can be some of the most powerful human beings if they channel that addiction into a healthy way. And I've always realized, or at least recently I've realized over the last few years, that either I'm going to end up dead in a ditch with alcohol and drugs, or I'm going to change the world and do something magnificent. There's going to be no middle ground with me. It's just the nature of the beast. So what led to Fearvana was me chatting with Jack Canfield, as I mentioned, a mentor, and I asked him, what would you have done differently in his career? And he would have said, I would have written my book sooner because of the impact his book, the amount of lives his book has changed. So that inspired me to write a book. And I was like, all right, well, what do I write about? What do I want to share with the world? And that's what led to me Fearvana. My ex-wife coined the term Fearvana, but I had been living the idea, and she just crystallized this concept by giving it a name. But I was really living this ethos of using fear as a vehicle for bliss. I don't need to go into it. It sounds like you've seen my interviews, so I don't need to go too much into it. My spiritual journey and how it impacted your recovery. I mean, it was everything, the spiritual path of confronting my darkness, confronting my demons, going into those spaces, learning just the flaws in, the people of the VA were good people, really cared. But I just learned that they were operating from a bad playbook, as a lot of forms of mental health today are, a lot of forms of therapy are. They're operating from a very bad playbook in how they approach it. Like, I mean, fundamentally, mental health is often, the belief is that mental health means the absence of tension, the absence of stress, the absence of anxiety, and it means being at inner peace, being at calm, and that's nonsense. Like, that's not what mental health is. One of my sort of things that I always say is that inner peace is not the absence of chaos or conflict. Inner peace is the acceptance of them. And you have to embrace the chaos. I learned to make my guilt work for me. For a long time, I had a picture of my friend that I lost up in the war. I had a picture of him and me up on my wall, and it said, "This should have been you. Earn this life." So your darkness can become your greatest allies, and you got to go. You got to go into those spaces, and there's nothing easy about that journey. I just think, I mean, forget about just addicts. People in today's world don't want to go into spaces of pain. We do everything to avoid pain, but you got to go into pain in order to go on the other side of that pain. It's like, I mean, one of my other mantras, if you will, is if you choose an easy life, you're only going to get a hard life. If you choose the hard thing, you'll find easy. So you got to seek out hard to find easy, or choose easy and you'll find hard. I mean, that's, addiction. You're drinking as you're running away. You're doing the easy thing because it's this much easier to do this than it is to, and it's hard. I mean, like, I'm not saying it's easy when you're sitting there throwing up drinking, but it's much easier than confronting your demons. So you got to go down that path. You got to go into those spaces, and that's what led to everything with Fearvana. I'm not sure if you read the book, but that I don't need to go into the details about the concept. The book covers it all. My inspiration to join the self-motivation industry. So I kind of started it after joining the Marines, because when I joined the Marines and got into climbing and all this kind of stuff, I started studying how do you build a better brain to handle these extreme adventures. And so when I first started building my business after coming back from Greenland, it was as a life coach. So joining the Marines was my entryway into the world of personal development, into the mindset of mastery. And then I got really into it after hitting that low moment on the verge of suicide, and then started devouring. I mean, I must have read 100 plus books to write Fearvana, devouring books. So that was kind of just my natural progression. I mean, almost if you're going to evolve and seek evolution from one place to the other, it's almost natural you'll get into personal development, right? Because that's what personal development is, to grow. So after coming out of drugs, joining the Marines, I was looking to grow. That was the initial point that led me to it. So many would say starting a business is stressful. Did that affect your recovery? Absolutely. Life is stressful. I mean, business is stressful. Everything is stressful. I broke my sobriety after getting divorced. After my divorce, I ended up breaking my sobriety. I wasn't proud of it, but I went, and when I break hard. I broke hard, binge drinking for days again, multiple times. So that's what led me to doing the 7 days of darkness, where I went and spent 7 days in darkness, isolation, and silence to go deeper within and find something. And that's what led me to realizing a lot about that. I felt guilty. To this day, I still wrestle with it, but I've learned to make it work for me. And now obviously I'm completely sober, but I learned to confront these feelings that I felt like I've always felt guilty. Like, why do I get this life? Why was I born to a good family? I have great parents, couldn't ask for a better life, better parents, when there's so many people suffering in the world. I haven't just gone through my own darkness. I've seen people in war zones, people in worked with former child soldiers in post-conflict zones, women who've been raped, victims of sex trafficking, people in leper colonies, extreme poverty, seeing the depths of human suffering within and without. And that stays with you. I've lost junior Marines to suicide. I've lost friends to addiction. I've lost friends in war. It stays with you. But life is stressful. That's why, I mean, the fundamental teaching of Fearvana is to develop a positive relationship to suffering. If you're always going to run away from pain, addiction is natural. One of the two friends I lost from addiction and people I see struggling with it, you have to fill that void with something. You have to fill that void with something. You can't just leave it empty. And that's a big barrier with people with addicts, is that you just try to leave it empty, and then you're naturally going to retreat. I mean, human beings, forget about just addicts. Human beings, our brain is naturally lazy. It will retreat to the laziest and the easiest course of action. So we have to, and we live in a world that feeds into that garbage. I mean, we live into a world that looks for easy, that preaches the easiest way out. I mean, you've seen all this nonsense, like walk 14 minutes a day and get six-pack abs. Firstly, that's just nonsense and it's not true. And secondly, even if it was true, it's missing the whole point. It's not about the six-pack abs. It's not about the $1,000,000. It's not about the house. It's not about the car. It's about the person we become on the journey, and the person we become, the evolution, happens through the struggle. But we live in a world that demonizes struggle. I mean, that's the whole essence of Fearvana. We live in a world that says fear is bad, stress is bad, anxiety is bad, adversity is bad, suffering is bad, pain is bad. When I do talks, I often start a talk will say things like fear, stress, anxiety, suffering, pain, adversity. How many people hear these words and think positive? Nobody thinks of them as positive words. And that's the problem. That's the problem. They're not negative. They just are. Fear is not negative. Stress is not negative. It just is. And we can do whatever we want with it. There are no bad or good emotions. There are no bad or good experiences. There are only experiences and there are only emotions. It's up to us to decide what we do with them. So life is stressful. Everything is stressful. But trying to run away from stress, which our society cultivates. I mean, the whole ethos of an American culture, we have a thing that says it's about the pursuit of happiness. That itself is a deeply flawed concept. It's not about pursuing happiness, because when you live in a world that promotes or says we should be pursuing happiness, then suffering becomes a barrier to the goal of happiness. The goal is not pursuing happiness. The goal is pursuing meaning, or what I like to call your worthy struggle. Because it is a struggle. I always like to say the question to ask is not about which passion do I follow, but which struggle am I willing to endure. Work a corporate job you hate, start a business. Start this business or that business. Stay in a relationship or be single. Every path, there's going to be struggles. Drink or stop drinking. There's going to be a struggle in both paths. Question is, which struggle are you willing to endure? But we live in a world that demonizes struggle and nobody wants to confront their pain. So we do everything to avoid it. And that's the fundamental problem. So, coming to your next question, forgive the rant, but I can go all day on this. But I'm an avid runner. My goal, so I've done 9 countries so far. Liberia was the last one, where I ran 167 miles. It was about a marathon a day across the country to help build a school out there. We also did humanitarian work out there to distribute water filters, school supplies. I worked with former child soldiers, drug addicts in the ghetto out there. Just a deeply powerful and moving experience. We raised thousands of dollars to help build the first sustainable vocational training school out there. Right now, just to give some clarity, that goal has kind of shifted, because I only want to do runs where the run can be of service. Like, for example, let's say I were to go run across Switzerland. It'd be beautiful. I would have a great time. But is that run going to provide value? Like running in Liberia, I was able to use my vehicle of service, which is running, to raise funds to build a school in a country that needs some help. So I don't care about running across Fiji, all these beautiful countries or whatever. Switzerland will be fun for me, but it won't add meaning. The run is not about me. It's about using one of my vehicles of service. The other is entrepreneurship, and I also have my own nonprofit. But one of my vehicles of service is adventure and running as a means to serve. Otherwise, what's the point? It's not about me going to have a good time in Switzerland. So I'm no longer planning on doing every country. I'm just going to go do countries where I can serve. So I am planning, for example, eventually run across India, a few other countries in Africa, places where I can serve, and the run can be used to do some good. So let's look at your last couple of questions here. I know it's very hard right now with social distancing and people not being able to connect like they've done traditionally. What some things people can do to help, especially if they're struggling with sobriety? Connecting with people virtually, connect with those you love. There's still virtual connection. Exercise is the by far the most important thing you can do. I don't mean there's one neuroscientist calls it a miracle grow for the brain. Just on a neurological level, the power of exercise is an absolute game changer, and it's the best thing you can do for mind, body, and spirit healing by far. Exercise. I mean, that's why I'm an ultra runner. It saved my life. That's another thing you can do. There's sort of the more obvious answers, which I don't have to tell you about, all the things, connection, meditation, exercise. Those are the more obvious answers. So I'm happy to share more of that, but I think we all know that, and I don't think there's anything unique about that. So I think the not so obvious answer is to actually confront the stuff you're running away from. That means going into the spaces of darkness, going into the spaces of pain. If you have somebody with you, do it in a monitored way. The beauty in self quarantine is potentially you can't go out to get drugs, or I mean, yes, liquor stores are still open, but you can potentially there's a constraint. There's always power in constraints. So if you're running away, you go into those spaces. When I stopped drinking and I broke my sobriety, my only trigger was being alone. It wasn't being around people. I could be in a room with every single human being in the room drinking, not even 0.1% desire to drink. My only trigger was being alone. And now I'm in self quarantine. I live alone. As I said, I'm divorced. And that's why I went into 7 days of darkness, to go deeper within. Because the problem is, connection is important. Connection is important. It's hugely important. We're social creatures, and evolutionarily speaking, we need social connection. But don't use connection as a band-aid from having to avoid confronting yourself. And this is the same true for addicts and not addicts. I mean, again, we live in a world that is most advice that I read articles about how to confront the quarantine are just nonsense, in my opinion. They're doing the same pattern. Here's 20 ways to run away from yourself. You know what you should do in quarantine? Sit your ass down and look at the wall. Let your thoughts go where they go. Go into your pain. Go into your darkness. The reason why I spent 7 days in darkness is because in pitch darkness, your mind has nowhere external to go. There's no consciousness. Your consciousness has nothing external to latch into, so you have nowhere to go but within. I learned this exercise from an endurance cyclist friend of mine of sitting and staring into a wall. He would sit still and stare into a wall. So no TV, no music, no painting even, no stimuli. And do this for 12 hours and then go riding for 12 hours. Now, I understand, I'm not saying do it for 12 hours in your first go, but confront that stillness. Don't do what the world does and run away from ourselves. We have this little tool, our laptops, Netflix, this, that, the other thing to run away from ourselves.